The objective of those sessions are discussing of commonly shared issues and learning from each other of how those are actually solved. Every single aspect of what we are doing today is going to be very different, I'd say, in the next 2 to 3 years. So AI is a bit like kind of peanut butter. It's spread on everything. So everyone kind of looks at it and says, well, I don't really know what's underneath it.
Yeah.
But everyone keeps using AI for everything.
Onyx Live is proudly sponsored by Humphrey's Law and Panacea.
It is Monday, the first proper day of JPM, and so many of the most interesting conversations occur behind closed doors. I sat down with Dr. Ali Pashazadeh, CEO of Treehill Partners, who have been facilitating exciting roundtable discussions examining the state of play of the industry and where we're headed in the future.
My name's Ali. I'm one of the co-founders of Treehill Partners.
And so we're here in San Francisco for JPM week. It's Monday where things are kicking off, and Treehill has been conducting with increasing intensity these roundtable sessions. Could you tell us a bit more? Who are you speaking to and what are you hoping to achieve?
Sure. So we set up in this JP Morgan 8 roundtable sessions. We've invited between 8 to 10 CEOs and other C-suites from biotechs globally. Thankfully and luckily, we've been oversubscribed on all of them. There's about 30 people who've signed up to each of the sessions. Sessions are about 45 minutes to an hour long. And the topics are CEO relevant topics, which are drug development, financing, drug development pitfalls, and so on and so forth. And the objective of those sessions are discussing of commonly shared issues and learning from each other of how those are actually solved.
And so over the past couple of days, what are some of the most pertinent and exciting topics been?
The exciting topics are quite interesting because they are exciting to each individual, because each individual is going down their specific journey of fundraising, making sure they have the right drug development partner, making sure they don't make drug development mistakes, understanding if they're looking for a partner, what's the right way of doing it. And I think the one topic which is highly relevant is global dexterity. How do they navigate the dynamic global landscape, whether China, Korea, Taiwan, India, Europe, US? How do we navigate it, just given the fact that the world keeps evolving around us?
So if we could speak perhaps more on the kind of geopolitics of the industry, the big talking point over the past few months has been the emergence of China as a biotech superpower compared to the US, and how other countries are sort of stacking up in this new world order of biotech and pharma. What have the discussions been like regarding that?
Well, the way I look at it, I look at it a little bit like an iceberg. When you say these topics are emerging, you're correct, because the iceberg has now kind of come out of the water and you can see the peak of it. We at Treehill have been covering China for the past 22 years. We've been covering Korea for about 7 years. We have announced a global collaboration with a leading Chinese company about 3 years ago. We've hired some of the former CEOs of large Chinese companies. It gets to the point where people are talking about it. It's because it's already been happening for the past 20 years. So it's actually quite interesting how these topics have become relevant, but the evolution of Korean biotech and how exciting the technology is there has been there for 4 or 5 years, and the nothing has really changed. It's just that people are talking about it. But from the Chinese perspective, if you think about the intensity of Chinese drug development and the fact that, for example, WuXi has 800 molecules itself, in China you can develop a drug and get into patients and have your first 5 patients dosed from 0 to 2 million, from nothing to actually getting to that point. Some of the larger Chinese pharma companies are filing an IND every 2 weeks. One of the pharma companies we were talking to yesterday, Chinese pharma companies we were talking to yesterday, has 400 ongoing clinical studies, which they run internally without a CRO. So for me, the interesting point here is the topic that we've been discussing for many, many years is now kind of a relevant topic that other people are picking up on.
And 2 factors that people often mention in that discussion are cheaper access to labor and also looser legislation. Do you feel like the US can compete with those factors? And are there any other major factors that you would point towards?
So I think the factors you're pointing to, you're correct. Those are factors that people are pointing to. However, if we think of the FDA and the FDA having been the gold standard of drug development from a regulatory perspective for the past 20, 30 years, and it remains there, the CFDA or the KFDA in terms of China or Korea very closely follow what the FDA does. So from a legislation perspective, I've never found them looser. So I've seen multiple drugs that are being manufactured or being developed in the US that actually can't get past the Chinese FDA, or the large pharma companies in China won't develop them. And one specific example was an interbatch variability where they were starting a clinical study in the US, and the large pharma, even if they had CFDA approval, was going to start a study because they wanted the batch consistency. So I don't think there's a laxer regulatory pathway. I think what there is an intensity point. Having worked with Chinese companies, for a very long time, what you find is they will throw human capital at it, they will throw intensity at it until they solve a problem. I don't think that is correlated to the cost of human capital. I think just the way they solve problems is very much, if you think about infrastructure, when Chinese highways, they put a motorway in, they put an 8-lane motorway in. They don't do what we do in the UK, which is 2 lanes that are widened to 4 lanes and so on and so forth. They come in and put 8 lanes in, and that's a problem solved. Or if it's a railway, it's a high-speed railway as of day one, and so it kind of to some extent becomes future-proofed. From a pharmaceutical perspective, it's just an intensity point. I think you've got very, very good drug scientists. You've got good drug developers, and I think what has happened is a lot of the Chinese individuals who were kind of American living here but from a Chinese origin, over time have gone back. So they have then taken that knowledge and augmented the intensity in China, and I think it makes China, Korea, and other countries relatively formidable kind of new entrants to the market.
There's certainly a lot of tension around China, but a lot less around Korea. Why do you think that's such a country of interest for Treehill?
We think both countries are interesting. Both countries have their strengths and weaknesses. When we went to Korea about 7 years ago, and we've been going on an annual basis, Korea has incredibly good scientists, incredibly elegant way of looking at new mechanisms of actions, new modalities, and incredibly meticulous drug development. The capability gap is post phase 2A, and it's not a country that has taken drugs and all the way through, so they get to kind of phase 2A and look to license out. Korea is less talked about than China. The reason being, the Korean companies, a lot of them have stopped at a phase 1B level. The large pharma want the phase 2, phase 3 assets, and that gap has existed for about 3 years. So you get people who kind of get to a certain point, they're just before transactions, so you're not seeing a huge number of Korean transactions. With the Chinese players, you have a greater volume of assets, and those assets are developed to a later stage, so they get to the zone of being transactable. That's why it's seen as a more intense market, because they just developed for a slightly longer time frame.
I see. And then moving on to drug discovery and some of its pitfalls, can you talk about Treehill's audit in 2025? What did you find, and what are some of the common pitfalls that the biotechs are falling into? Interesting.
So the analysis that we ran in 23-24 was looking at 1,200 clinical studies, and the pitfalls, and these are clinical studies of phase 2, phase 3, that have been designed with a global CRO. What we found is 85% of those programs had a material design flaw post input from a CRO. Only 5% of those programs had a commercially relevant target product profile. We found inability to explain why that drug was being developed scientifically or medically in about 60% of cases, where it was quite unclear why they were doing that one study. We then reran that with about 400 clinical studies, and the numbers are actually quite consistent. So there is no evolution that we can see that people are developing drugs more effectively, more efficiently, or in a more targeted way.
And why do you think that is?
That's how we've always developed drugs. And I think having learned that, what we did at Treehill is to say, understand exactly where the pitfalls are, where mistakes are being made, and the companies that we work with being laser focused on, one, every dollar that you spend has to move the drug forward. Two, everything that you spend you have to have a commercially relevant target product profile, and the clinical development plan that you have has to be FDA compliant, and there's no fat left on the bone. So from that perspective, we've taken those lessons, which is now about 1,700 or so case studies, and put them into our drug development advisory model, which we call the clinical development optimization model, CDO model. And the CDO model is focused on learning from other people's mistakes and other people's pitfalls and making sure that we don't replicate those.
Mm-hmm. We've spoken briefly on CROs and how biotechs consult with them, often used to de-risk their processes along with advisors and KOLs. Do you feel like it's a successful effort on the part of the biotechs to de-risk in this way?
No.
And why do you think they fail in that regard?
I don't think it's a failure. I think it's you're using for the wrong reason. And I think it's a bit like when a patient goes to a hospital, and when a patient goes to a hospital, they're expecting the doctor to somehow know the history and they will solve all the problems. It should be a shared journey. And you expect the patient to be open, to be honest with you, and as the symptoms evolve, to articulate that. From a biotech perspective, a lot of times the chief medical officers will engage with KOLs. The KOLs will have a view. That view then gets incorporated into the synopsis. That then goes to the CRO. They ask the CRO on a regular basis, what do you think of it? Is this reasonable? They say, yes, I think it's reasonable. Then you go to the FDA, and the FDA says, I think this is safe for patients. Then what was a hypothesis now becomes a validated hypothesis. But no one's ever asked the question, is that drug really effective in that indication? Can I take the money and the energy that I'm going to put into that? Can I go for a different indication? When the KOLs said whatever they said, did the CRO really engage in a conversation and push back on it and say, I don't actually agree with that. I think we should do something different. So that's almost a challenge model of testing the null hypothesis until you've got the best hypothesis doesn't happen. It's easier when a client comes in to just say, that's a study you want to run, as long as the FDA thinks it's safe, as long as the KOLs are supportive, well, that's the study we want to run. And that leads to what we think in phase 3s, probably 75% of phase 3s fail unnecessarily. And I think the underlying get out clause is when a drug fails, we immediately have the ability to blame the molecule. We say, look, the molecule just didn't deliver. And that's not us. And what we have tried to do at Treehill, and we have worked with a number of CROs who are actually engaging in a productive way, is not they don't want to do it, but from that, they're just not built to challenge the hypothesis. They will serve what you ask them to do. They'll deliver on what you want. And from our perspective, that gap is highly inefficient. And that's where we spend a lot of our time, which is working with companies to challenge the null hypothesis. And that's where the CEOs respond very well.
And in 2026, what does the model of raising capital effectively look like? And how does that vary from, say, 5 years ago?
I think materially is different because for the past, I'd say 4 or 5 years, the IPO markets have been closed. We have seen a lot of funds begin to shut down. We've seen a lot of funds only investing in assets they have. And we're not seeing a huge number of follow-ons out there. And we're seeing, given the number of assets that are out there, we're not seeing huge licensing deals for them to step in, for large pharma to step in. So if you're looking to run a capital raise or a licensing process in 2026, one, we at Treehill no longer run single track processes. So we don't run just the capital raise or just the licensing or just the sell side. We will prepare a company for a transaction and we're able to flip between one structure and another structure. Two, we think the amount of preparation that needs to go to get an asset prepared has never been more critical. So we will not take a company, we will never represent a company unless we've done the diligence ourselves. We're comfortable with the clinical study. We think if we take this to investors or large pharma, they will support it. So unless you do everything that you expect the other partner to do, at least do the thinking, and then approach an investor and say, this is what is our hypothesis. This is how we would spend the money. This is what we'd spend it on. This is how much it would cost. This is how long it would take. These are the strengths. These are the weaknesses. I think then you have a chance of getting a deal done if you have the right asset and the right team. 5 years ago, I think that if we look at quantum of preparation versus today, it was probably 30 to 40% of the amount of preparation that we'll put in today. Sorry, 5 years ago versus today.
Interesting. And so do you see people who are willing to put in that work, or do you feel like there's a mismatch between expectations?
There's a mismatch. So if we think of it mathematically, so take away personalities and other stuff, if you're a banker 10 years ago, you would say 10% of my deals go through. I need 10 situations, one will go through, and that'll pay my bonus. If you then say the probability is halved, then you need 20 projects. You're not going to spend twice as much. You're not going to have twice as many investment bankers. You're just going to prepare half as much. So when we're sitting on the buy side, I'd say probably 5 to 10% of buy side situations that are prepared by an investment bank or a boutique or a transaction advisor are adequately prepared. And that makes them highly vulnerable to value erosion and makes them very vulnerable for someone looking at them and saying, look, you're just not prepared. Come back to me in 3 or 6 months once you're prepared.
And finally, one of the large talking points this year, as it was last year as well, is AI. Nowadays, you'd be hard pressed to find a biotech or pharma company that isn't claiming to utilize AI in some way, which makes it very tough to tell who's meaningfully differentiating themselves compared to their predecessors. What do you make of this?
I think it's going to completely transform almost every aspect of what we do. And I think that's a good thing. So from a diligence perspective, when we at Treehill are helping companies on the diligence side, they're now approaching us with probably a 200-page diligence report that they've generated on AI. They haven't gone to Bain, they haven't gone to a BCG, they haven't gone to a McKinsey. They have probably 1 or 2 individuals at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the time, producing a diligence report that's actually really good. We then at Treehill need to use our team and 30 years of experience per person to then add the 5 to 10% of flowering on top of it to then say, do we agree, do we disagree? But it's not one of these situations anymore where they have to spend 400,000 on a vendor due diligence that we then get to look at. So from a diligence perspective, diligence timelines just say, well, 3 months. We at Treehill can now diligence an asset within a day. So a molecule per day easily. On the market assessment side of ranking of which assets to look at this conference alone, we've come across 3 business development teams, separate business development teams, who, when they're given 5 or 10 assets, put the assets into their in their proprietary algorithm, and then it spits out, this is the drug you should look at, this has got the highest commercial potential, lowest risk, so on and so forth. And then the next step, and this is something that we at Treehill are working on, is how do we do the whole drug development process in a much more automated way? Why is a target product profile costing you, for example, north of 100,000? Why can't that be done in a much more automated way? So I think every single aspect of what we are doing today is going to be very different, I'd say, in the next 2 to 3 years. At this conference, people aren't able to quantify it yet. So AI is a bit like kind of peanut butter. It's spread on everything. So everyone kind of looks at it and says, well, I don't really know what's underneath it. Yeah. But everyone keeps using AI for everything. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, it'll be materially different. Yeah. The speed of development, the cost of development, the cost of diligence, the quality of advice that are given, a lot of that will be genericized, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. And with people being able to access these AI tools so readily, has that changed the nature or the depth of input that you provide at Treehill?
It makes it harder for us to add value. Because a lot of what's out there, especially as if you think about AI, it's not a static target, it's an exponential target. So what we find today, and this will be different tomorrow, when someone on my team who's got 30 years of drug development expertise is able to ask AI the right questions, because he or she knows exactly what to ask per molecule, per pathway, per indication, they get a report which would have taken someone 6 weeks to do. But then to get someone who's got 30 years experience to ask that question is very difficult. Now roll it forward to 2 years, all of that would have been included in the system. So the person who's asking those questions probably can ask much more rudimentary questions and will probably get the same quality of, or if not better, output.
So how do you future-proof yourself?
I don't think you do. I think we're in a stage where it's a bit like the shark's tooth. You know, in humans, we just assume that we have 2 sets of teeth and they'll last us forever. Sharks have gone down the route of my teeth aren't going to last the whole time. You know, my teeth are going to continue revolving. I think Treehill, if it does what it does in 2027, JP Morgan, I think we'd failed. And we've been like this for the past 12 years. There is no way that within 12 months we should be doing the same things at the same speed, at the same cost, and the same intensity as we did 12 months ago. So I think unless you evolve, we're completely going to be left behind.
Yeah, so we were speaking earlier today to a few CEOs regarding the breakthrough news at the end of 2025, which was the first ever FDA approval for an oral GLP-1 pill. How big a development do you think that is for the industry, and has it been involved in any of the discussions today?
So we spent a lot of time in early 2025 and during the course of 2025 looking at the impact of the oral GLP-1s. And it's not as straightforward as you think. It isn't a subcutaneous is bad, oral will completely replace them. And we think that there is a role for it, but it's not a one-for-one. And then within so one comes in, one goes out. So it's not a cannibalization fully. There's an evolution, and we expect that it'll expand the market almost as much as it'll kind of erode. I think the biggest news was in the November to January timeframe was the pricing of GLP-1s going down to about a third of what they were at the end of last year. I think that's the biggest news. And if you think of the so far that hasn't rippled down to the CDMOs, et cetera, who are manufacturing it. And then on the GLP-1s, they're not the same. They're not all oral GLP-1s. The bioavailability is very different amongst them. And some of the ones that we've diligenced, we think will massively expand the market. Now, the question is the differentiation in terms of how much weight loss you have, when it's not as extreme. And also, is it muscle sparing and focus just on fat, or is it actually other tissues that it reduces as well? So I think it's an exciting space. My personal view as a clinician is still very cautious about GLP-1s, and I think I'm in the minority on this. And I'm thinking from a biophysiology perspective, which is where in the human biophysiology have we allowed a drug to completely overrule our system? Now we do it in the female reproductive, in the contraceptive and in HRT, but then we do it with a cycle point. But here on the GLP-1, we completely put crush the axis.
Yeah.
So from a clinical perspective, one thing I am surprised about, and again, I've been a doctor for 31 years now, is we see all the clinical benefits. But from a biophysiology perspective, I still have to ask the question, when was it okay for us to do this to one of our axes? And we do it in GLP-1s without thinking about the long-term implication. Now, maybe there is no long-term implication, but I do have to ask the question. I don't really always get an answer to that question. So do I think it's exciting? Yes. Do I think there's a clinical benefit? Yes. Have we seen huge amount of side effects? No. Do I think the orals are exciting? Yes. Do I think some orals are being developed where they have a kind of a better bioavailability will expand the market? Absolutely. But all of that in the context where the pricing is a third of what it was at the end of last year.
And in that context regarding crushing the axis, if we fast forward to a time where this is available over the counter, would you be in favor of something like that being accessible to the general population?
If I think of biophysiology, no. So from a biophysiology perspective, it's a powerful drug that does a powerful, it's a bit like an insulin. Would you give insulin over the counter? You wouldn't give insulin over the counter because you're actually changing something which is quite powerful. So in this perspective, I haven't thought through and I haven't seen any sort of abuse behavior or anything else. But, when I've traveled through developing countries, you get access to antibiotics over the counter and respiratory medication over the counter, and they're still powerful. This one, it is actually a very powerful drug when it comes to weight reduction. So if it's not in a supervised manner, we've seen patients lose 30, 40% of their weight, which is actually not very healthy. So from that perspective, it does raise concerns.
Well, very excited to see that evolution take place. Ali, thank you so much for your insights.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.